I'm Denise from Dandy's Social Club, and today we're going to make a wraparound skirt from the pattern that you constructed in class at Fabricate. This is the wraparound skirt we're going to make, so let's get started. Here I have my two pieces that we drafted in class. I have my back piece and my flap over pieces, front and back. We are cutting two of the flap pieces from the lining fabric and two of the flap pieces from the exterior fabric. For the main piece, we're going to cut one on the fold of the lining fabric and one of the main fabric. First thing we're going to do is we're going to sew the three pieces of the lining and the three outer pieces together. Let's get started. Matching right sides together, we're going to connect these are my lining pieces. We're going to connect the long straight edge together on each side of the main back piece. The rounded corner that we made here will become our end of our skirt, so we don't want to connect that to the side of the back piece. Here I have my two lining pieces, face right sides together, long straight edge to long straight edge. Let's go to the sewing machine and sew these up. Okay, so I'm going to start by sewing my lining together. I have three pieces. Of course, you can feel free to pin these. Most of you know how I feel about pins. I think they just waste time. So I'm going to keep mine unpinned, straight edge together here on the side seam, and a second one here on this side seam. When we're done with this, we'll go right into sewing our outer fabric exactly the same way. Don't forget 1/2 inch seam allowances. Okay, there we go. That's my exterior three panels sewn together, and I have my lining panels sewn together too. Let's take them over to the iron and press these seam allowances open. For those of you who've never pressed open a seam allowance, we're going to spread the seam allowance wide and press them so that one goes to one side and one goes to the other. We're going to do this on all four seams that we just sewed, 2 on the outer fabric and 2 on the lining fabric. Now that we have all the seam allowances pressed open, we're going to take both of these pieces back to the table and pin them together so we can get ready to sew them together all the way around, right sides together. Hi, okay, so here we are back at the table. I have my 3 panel pieces of my exterior fabric lined up, and now I'm going to lay down my lining fabric so that they're right sides together. We're going to make sure to align the seams that we've sewn at the top and the bottom. And although many of you know I don't really love pins, I'm actually going to pin these guys together. Okay, there I go. I have both panels pinned together all along the side seams and the bottom seams, and I have made sure I've lined up my matching seams along the sides. Now we're going to sew down the side, around this curve, across the bottom, and up the other side. When we're done with that, we'll turn the entire thing inside out, clip the curves, and iron it flat. Let's go to the sewing machine. Okay, so all three sides are sewn across the sides and the bottoms. Now we'll go over and iron them. We'll clip the curves first, then we'll turn the entire thing inside out and press them. Okay, so I've already removed my pins that we had to hold the two pieces together. Now we're going to talk about clipping curves. Around this outer edge where we've made our curved corners, we need to clip that corner so that when we turn the entire panel to the inside, there's not a lot of bulk in here. Traditionally, we can use a scissors and cut V cuts out of the curve. We're going to cut close to the stitching without actually cutting the stitching, and we're going to cut V notches all the way around the curved section. You don't need to do this along straight edges, just along the curves. A really good shortcut for this, though, is if you have a pair of pinking shears, you can go ahead and do the same notching by pinking the corner. Again, close to the stitching without cutting your stitching. This way you can get right close to the stitching and you won't have to worry about it coming undone because of fraying. So pinking or clipping. Let's get those corners unbulky when we turn them to the outside. Now we'll take the panels that are connected, turn them so the right sides are facing out, and press the entire seam that we just sewed. Okay, so I have the front and the back panels sewn together now, and you can see I've got a long swath here. What we'll do next is we're going to top stitch the edge that we've already sewn, the seamed edge, as well as the top raw edge, so that when we put the waistband in, the edges will stay aligned and we won't have to worry about that. Let's go to the sewing machine. Okay, so we're going to top stitch the finished edge that we just did, as well as the raw top edge that hasn't been finished yet. What I want to remind you here is, although we've been using 1/2 inch seam allowances, for the top stitching we'll stay close to the edge, about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch away from the seamed edge, and within 1/8 of an inch on the raw edge. So just stay close to the edge, as close as you can. Let's go. Okay, so I've gone all the way around, all sides, top stitched. You can see I'm close to the edge, and along the raw edge, the top of the skirt, I've stitched close to the edge, so that when we attach our waistband, these two pieces will stay connected, aligned with our seams, front and back matching. We won't have to worry about pinning as much. Let's go get the waistband and the straps constructed. Okay, so now we have our skirt completely constructed, and we need to go ahead and draft the panels for the waistband. We didn't do this in class because it's a simple equation. What I've done is I've made together an equation like this. Okay, so now we're back at the table. We're going to construct our waistband. We didn't draft the waistband in class because it's a simple mathematical equation. We're going to take the distance of one panel wide times 4 minus 2 inches overall. What I've done here on this fabric is I've measured a strip that's 3.5 inches wide, and I'm going to cut those strips and connect them so that they end up with our 50 inches of waistband. That's what I need for my skirt, 50 inches. I have a 13-inch panel, times 4 is 52 inches, minus 2 inches gives me a 50-inch waistband. The fabric is only 42 inches wide, so I'm going to have to join that somewhere. Okay, so I've marked 2 strips 3.5 inches wide overall. I need 2 strips here because my fabric, like I said, is only 42 inches wide, and I need a 50-inch waist. Of course, I'm not a 50-inch waist, But since it's a wraparound, we have 16 inches of overlap. So let's cut these guys out. Okay, now that I have my 2 strips cut, we need to identify where the connection point for these 2 strips is going to be. Of course, we could have it anywhere along the waistband, but if we line it up with the seam allowance, it'll be less noticeable and we'll be able to work our buttonhole in at the same time. So my panel is 13 inches wide. That way, therefore, I'm going to cut a 14-inch wide strip from this first strip I've cut. 14 inches, because this is 13, plus a ½ inch on either end for my seam allowance gives me 14 inches. So we'll cut 14 inches from this strip, and from this strip, we'll cut the difference of 50 minus 14, which is 36. Okay, so I've got my waistband pieces cut. You can see the first piece fits across one panel with a ½ inch on either side. If it's a little longer than that, that's better. Definitely cut over than cut under. So if I have a little extra, that's fine. My second panel here, my second waistband piece, is the width of the remaining piece of the skirt plus a ½ inch on either side. What we'll do now is we'll go to the sewing machine and connect these pieces. I'm going to show you right now how to connect them so that it's prepared with a buttonhole without using a buttonholer. But if you have a buttonholer on your sewing machine, you can obviously put a simple buttonhole in, or check out my video on buttonholes to see lots more information on how to make one of those. Okay, so we're back at the sewing machine now, and I have my 2 waistband pieces face to face. I'm using a vintage sewing machine, my favorite of all, but unfortunately it doesn't have a buttonholer. So for those of you who don't have a sewing machine that has a built-in buttonhole feature, I'm going to show you how to do it without a buttonholer. Using ½ inch seam allowance, I'm going to connect my waistbands in 3 places. At the end, a ½ inch, at the center, a ½ inch, and at the other end, a ½ inch. And I'm going to leave spaces between. Those spaces will ultimately become our buttonhole. Don't forget, we're going to be a ½ inch in from the edge for ½ inch seam allowances. Okay, so once I cut away my stitching here, you can see I have 3 small bits of stitching. I have one here that's a ½ inch, one in the middle that's a ½ inch, and one on the end that's a ½ inch. That leaves openings here and here, which will simulate a buttonhole when we attach the waistband to the skirt. Let's go press these seam allowances open with the iron, and then I'll show you how to finish this up. So here we are on the iron. I've pressed the seam allowances open, and you can see I have a hole here and a hole here with the center section connected and the end sections connected. While we're here at the iron, I'm going to go ahead and press my waistband right down the middle. This will make it easier to see where the top of the waistband is when we attach it to the skirt. And I like to group my operations so I don't go back and forth between the sewing machine to the iron and then back to the sewing machine. Since I'm already here at the iron, we may as well go ahead and do this right now. Okay, so now I have this pressed, and we're going to go ahead and attach it to our skirt. Let's go get the other pieces. Okay, so let's attach our waistband. What I've done is, at our seam line, I'm pinning it directly to the seam line at the skirt. I'm starting with the right side of my outer fabric facing up and my waistband facing down with the raw edges connected. You can see as I lay this across the top line of my skirt that I'm actually overhanging more than ½ inch. That is not a problem, and we're going to tuck that end in as we assemble this skirt. as we assemble the waistband. But for now, we'll pin it in place so we can start here with half of an inch seam allowance all the way across the top of the waistband to the other side. Let's go sew it up. Okay, so we're back at the sewing machine now. We're going to attach our waistband. I've gone ahead and pinned my waistband across the entire top of my skirt, and you can see here at the opposite end, it also overlaps by about half of an inch. What we'll do is we'll sew the right sides together, raw edges connected, with a half of an inch seam allowance all the way along. Then we're going to turn this waistband this way and to the inside, and you can see we'll have a finished waistband. Let's get started. Okay, so I've gone all the way across the entire top. You can see here are my buttonholes that I've made. What we'll do now is we're going to turn the waistband to the inside. We'll press this under 1/4 of an inch and we'll top stitch the entire thing down. There you can see my finished waistband. Let's get started. Okay, so before we get started sewing, let's actually get this prepped with the iron. By pre-ironing this waistband into position, it'll be a lot easier to sew. So the first thing we'll do is fold in the excess that we have on the end. We'll just fold it over. Next, press it down. We'll press the seam allowances upward toward the waistband all the way across. As you're doing this, try not to lose your center crease that we pre-ironed earlier in this video. We'll go all the way across the other side. Same thing here with the excess. We'll just fold it over and press it into place. The next step will be, let's fold down 1/4 of an inch from the top edge. This will make it so that when we turn our waistband over, it'll be finished both inside and outside for a truly reversible skirt. You can see I'm just eyeballing this, but feel free to use a ruler if you're not sure about how far 1/4 of an inch is. Now we have the sides folded in and the top edge finished. You can see when we fold this down and repress our pre-made top fold, how this will finish just perfectly. So we're going to go all the way along the edge, pressing that down into position. Here you can see how the finished waistband will look on the inside and the outside. Okay, so we've got the waistband all pressed. You can see here front and back it's all pressed. What we'll do is from the front side we're going to do what's called stitching in the ditch. We're going to stitch right along the seam line, right in that gap, and you can see that when we pressed it, our back edge is a little bit deeper than the front. So as we stitch here in the ditch, I'll show you with my pin where I'm talking about, right in here, we will catch the back side down. We'll go all the way across the top opening, and we won't do the ends of the waistband because we're going to leave those open to connect our straps, which will be our next and final step. Okay, so the waistband is finished now. You can see on the exterior side that the top stitching is actually in the ditch, so it's almost not noticeable at all. Here on the opposite side, the top stitching actually holds down the waistband. It also looks just as professionally finished, but a little bit different than the outside. The ends are folded in, but left open because we're going to install our straps right into there. Now let's take a look at the buttonhole. Here it is. I wanted to show you this to show you that even I don't always do things perfectly. My buttonhole, which is here, is misaligned with my side seam, just slightly. That won't make any difference whatsoever. But what I do want to show you is that I do have a little opening here on my side seam. I'll finish that up with a hand sew, just connect those two together. And also, I'll hand sew my buttonhole so that it's just like this. I'll sew the front edge of my waistband to the back, which is right inside there. That will just clean that up nicely. We'll finish it up with a hand stitch and it'll be perfect. This is where if you had a buttonhole on your machine, you would install a buttonhole here and make a little slit. This is so that the strap can come through for the finished ties. Let's go do the ties now. Okay, so let's construct our straps. The final part, the ties for the skirt. I've cut mine 2 inches wide by 28 inches long. You might find that you want them longer or shorter depending on how much tie you want hanging down, but 28 should cover it. I'm going to show you how to construct these straps by traditional methods, but for more information on bias tape and how to construct bias tape using a bias tape maker, you can check out my video on bias tape making. Let's go to the iron. Okay, here we are at the iron. I'm going to go ahead and take my both straps. I'm going to fold them raw edges together so I have a folded edge right down the center. Next, I'll open this up and fold each edge right into the middle folded seam, and ultimately we'll fold it back this way. So what we'll have at the end is a fully finished piece of bias tape, and it looks like this. Raw edges are inside, closed up. Let's get the whole thing ironed. Ready? Okay, so I've got both my straps ironed and pressed, ready to go get stitched in. I just wanted to show you one quick thing before we leave here. One edge of my strap is raw. That's the edge that will attach into the skirt. On the other side, I've gone ahead and folded in the edge into my folded strap. So here's the end, folded it in, brought both sides to the middle, and then the whole thing folds in half. This gives you a nice clean finished edge on one side. This will be the edge that's on the end of our strap that stays outside the skirt. Let's go stitch them in. Okay, the raw edge of the strap goes right into the opening on the waistband. Align it with the top edge of the waistband. We'll stitch down along here and then along our strap. I'm stitching along the open side along my strap to connect that together all the way to the end along the tip that we folded under, and we can be finished. We'll do this twice, one on each strap. All right, that's it. Let's try it on.